Welcome to the second episode in a Legendarium series about the life and reign of King Edward III of England. In part 2, When Treachery Reigned, we will talk about the deposition of King Edward II and the coronation of King Edward III, but a new king did not mean an end to old problems. In September 1326, King Edward II's vengeful wife, Queen Isabella, arrived in England with her son Edward III, her lover Roger Mortimer, and an army that she would use to convince her husband to retire. By Christmas 1326, the reign of Edward II had ended. Everybody knew that except Edward II himself. To see her son Edward III on the throne, Queen Isabella needed her husband to abdicate. Edward II himself, a prisoner at Kenilworth Castle, raged and fumed against his wife, carrying a knife at all times, swearing that he would murder his wife if he ever saw her. When Parliament summoned him, Edward II refused to come, thinking that without him, government would grind to a halt. It did not. Rebel bishops condemned the king as a wicked tyrant. Bishop Adam of Hereford accused the king of being a homosexual under the control of his favorites, now presumed to be his lovers. True or not, that charge stuck to Edward II for centuries. Finally, the Archbishop of Canterbury introduced the notables to 14-year-old Edward III. They greeted him with the singing of hymns and the swearing of oaths of loyalty. Two bishops went to Kenilworth Castle to give Edward II the news of his deposition. Edward II resisted, but the churchmen warned him that if he refused to give up, the Plantagenet line would be deposed completely. When Edward II finally gave up his power, he became so grief-stricken that he had to be held up while he signed the instrument of abdication. Because his mother Isabella brought him to power while his father still lived, the coronation of Edward III took place with unseemly haste. The 36-year-old Earl Henry of Lancaster became the king's nominal guardian and knighted him with 3 of Roger Mortimer's sons in a January ceremony. Westminster Abbey filled with magnates and prelates to watch Archbishop Reynolds of Canterbury lower the large crown of Edward the Confessor onto the young king's head. To keep the oversized crown from toppling, which would have been taken as an evil omen in that superstitious time, the archbishop filled the crown with padding. Despite the fact that England had been nearly beggared by the misrule of Edward II, the notables threw a grand party. The hall glistened with priceless cloth and plate. Golden cloth hung upon the royal throne. It communicated the idea that despite the coup, the throne remained glorious. Yet at age 14, Edward III could not rule on his own. His mother, Queen Isabella, and Roger Mortimer assumed real power. And a new king did not mean an end to old problems. On September 23, 1327, Edward III learned that his father had died, supposedly of natural causes. In the months that followed, King Edward III informed Parliament and made plans to bury the late King Edward II. He was entombed on December 20th, 1327, at St. Peter's Abbey under a royal effigy. As the years went on, rumors of King Edward II's death grew more outrageous. The fact was that conspirators had tried to free the deposed king at least 3 times within a year, and if the rebels could get a hold of him, they could easily present themselves as loyal subjects trying to restore the rightful monarch and rally anybody unhappy with the rule of Isabella and Roger Mortimer. Queen Isabella and Roger Mortimer both had good reason to hate Edward II and more reason to wish him dead. One rumor held that Mortimer and Isabella punished Edward II for his supposed homosexuality with poetic justice, ramming a red-hot poker up his bottom and burning him to death internally while a man pressed a table upon his chest to keep him from squirming away. Most likely, the king's custodians, both Mortimer's men, quietly murdered him in a less horrific fashion. King Charles IV of France, Isabella's brother, took advantage of the trouble in England to press his rights in England's continental holdings, Aquitaine and Gascony. Aware that she could not fight a war at home and in France, Isabella agreed to pay her brother 50,000 marks in exchange for keeping sole rights to Gascony, a tiny sliver of the old Plantagenet Empire. Knowing how her English subjects would view this treaty, she kept the terms of the agreement a secret. But on the Scottish borders, the English cause fared even worse. Border raids continued through the summer of 1327 and 1328 as the Scots took advantage of English trouble. Edward III and his mother Isabella traveled to York in May 1328 with a band of 500 Flemish knights. They faced legendary Scottish commander James Douglas, also known as the Black Douglas, who spent several weeks dodging his English pursuers before suddenly attacking the royal camp at Stanhope Park, scattering the king's attendants while bellowing, "Douglas! Douglas!" King Edward III became so enraged by his failure in Scotland that he wept openly. The campaign burned through funds so fast that he had to pawn the crown jewels to keep the kingdom solvent. Edward III, much to his anger and shame, signed a treaty with Scotland which gave up any claim to the northern kingdom in exchange for 20,000 marks. A war that raged for a generation ended in utter failure. Yet Queen Isabella found one real success in her son's marriage. She made good on her promise to wed Edward III to Philippa of Hainault in a lavish ceremony held during January 1328. In another show of magnificence that belied royal weakness, the couple was married in a grand, gold-trimmed ceremony financed by the Plantagenet's wealthy Italian bankers, the Bardi family. Yet Edward III had a problem bigger than money. Roger Mortimer used the Queen's affections to snatch up any estate and title that he could. At first, the Queen and Mortimer simply retook estates that Edward II stole from them, which no one objected to. But soon Mortimer took to holding round tables and parading himself as a new King Arthur. Nobles who rebelled to end such misrule by favorites grew more and more worried they'd exchanged one crook for another. By the spring of 1330, 18-year-old Edward III had his first son with Queen Philippa, the future Edward the Black Prince. As he planned for his wife's coronation, he heard rumors that his father, Edward II, remained alive and at large. While these fearful rumors swirled, Roger Mortimer grew so corrupt that he stole money intended to fortify Gascony against a French invasion. When another nobleman named the Earl of Kent objected, Mortimer suddenly assembled a court in Winchester Castle, charged Kent with treason, and produced some hastily written letters proving it. With these, he condemned Kent to death. No one could be found to execute the terrifying and sudden sentence. In the end, Roger Mortimer found a prisoner who cleaned the Winchester latrines and gave him freedom in exchange for executing the sentence. As King Edward III welcomed his firstborn son and heir into the world, he knew that his kingdom groaned under Mortimer's cruel tyranny. Another man ruled his kingdom, slept with his mother, and murdered his kinsman as he saw fit. Soon, young Edward III would change that. That wraps things up for this episode of The Legendarium. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, press like. If you want to see more, press subscribe. And if you've got anything to say, let me know in the comments section. Thanks again for joining me, and I hope that you have a great rest of the day.